Hello, everybody. Welcome back to English Champion. I hope you have had a great summer. I've got something for you today that might make you laugh. It might make you cry. It's a bit of it's something that should elicit both emotions because it is about the present state of college students. It's been like this for quite a while. And the reason I'm sharing this with you today is because I saw on Twitter, I think it was, one account that I follow from time to time, as well as on Substack. He was in a conversation with somebody about how kids are getting into schools and the low level of performance and just how bad things have gotten academically regarding kids getting into colleges. And so he was like, any professors out there, please share your stories of what's actually going on. And because we think it's bad, but we don't always have a lot of proof about it. We just kind of think that that's what's going on. And I was like, oh, let me show you. So this is a response to him and anyone else who is wondering what the state of incoming freshmen is really like regarding their background knowledge at college campuses. So this little project I invented came about because, one, I was noticing quite a while ago that the school I was at started admitting students who were less qualified. And I could tell things were getting worse and worse year by year. And again, it was just sort of a general feeling, but I could tell these kids don't know as much as my previous kids did. 10 years ago, when I would have a conversation with students and I brought up a topic not only about English, but about any other subject area, like I could tell they could kind of stay with me. And yet it was becoming more evident in my daily discussions or just in the work that the students were producing that these kids were they're just not as qualified to be at the college level. What I was also noticing is just that my references I would make in my classes were not landing like they used to. I became a college professor in 2007. And by when I did this little test, which was 2018, 10, 11, 12 years later, I started noticing, boy, the jokes or the little analogies or any little story I would tell that worked 10 years ago wasn't working anymore. There was this disconnect in the culture where students just weren't aware of stuff. So, I used to be able to make a Seinfeld joke in class because, it had only been 8 years or so since Seinfeld had gone off the air. And of course, it was still always in reruns. And, even kids who weren't watching it when it was on like I was, they knew enough about the show that they would, if I made a joke about it, they knew it. Or any really famous film, I could talk about it in class and the kids knew about it. Or, big time historical sporting events, if they didn't know the details, the kids kind of generally knew what was going on. By 2017, 2018, 2019, I was like, I couldn't talk about anything. And I'm a teacher who uses lots of different references when I'm explaining things because I know English isn't always for everybody. And when I'm explaining, whether it's an actual English topic or we're using a source from some other field to read about in our English class, I try to make everything relevant for my students. So I draw on sports and music and movies and history and maybe even some scientific concept and something in politics or current events. Like I draw on everything. That's just kind of how my brain works, is everything I'm thinking about or reading about or studying at the moment, I connect to 50 other things. And so I try to do that for kids so that they have something to latch onto and remember what I'm talking about for that day in class. And I started noticing again that we might be dealing with a difficult topic. And I'd say, well, it's kind of like this. If you remember back, 30 years ago, this is what happened with this important thing. And the kids are like, no idea what I was talking about. It's like, well, it was kind of a big deal. You should know about it, even if you weren't alive for it. It's an important part of our history, or important part of our culture, and right over their heads. Again, 10 years ago, they would stay with me. Now, completely confused. So, it was not only in my teaching style, which is to make a lot of references to a lot of things to give kids to connect to, that I could tell these kids don't know things about the culture. But in addition to that, it was also just on pure academics. I could tell the students were not as intelligent. They just weren't. So I simultaneously I had also been reading, especially over summer break, tons of E.D. Hirsch and lots of like cultural knowledge theory stuff, and so that was really on my brain. I was noticing these things, and I was reading about it and studying those kind of educational philosophies. And I was like, well, let me just see if my suspicions are confirmed. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all I'm seeing is really just anecdotal, and I'm just having kind of the bad luck of having a few, not so bright kids in class, and it's really distorting my whole view of how prepared these kids are after they leave high school. Let me test this. And so on the first day of class, with all my classes that year, I made a test, a quiz, and I was trying to think of a variety of questions that maybe older folks would have forgotten because over time you things if you're not thinking about them constantly, you do forget. And so even things that are kind of big in the culture might escape your memory after a certain period of time. So some of these questions I would ask to older people, and they would go, I don't remember that. But for those who just had 13 years of education where you're touching on these topics, or at least most of them, maybe not every single year, but several times from fifth grade through 12th grade, like you should have covered this, and it should have been part of your general education for a while now, and you just left high school, so it should be at least sort of fresh in your mind. And so those are the questions I came up with. I came up with a 55 question test that includes multiple choice, includes some short answer, and even includes some short essay answer with like, I need you to explain this, and I'll show you those here shortly. And so I came up with a variety of questions that I would have known as a high school student. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to pick these really, arcane references that no one knows. No, this is all basic stuff that, again, as a high school kid in the late 90s, I would have known these things. And as a college student, I would have known them. And even today, I still know them. So like these are not weird questions. Again, for some people, many of them might have slipped, but for the most part, these are pretty basic, as you'll see. So I wanted to see how smart our kids were about the general culture. And some of these questions are specifically kind of school-oriented academic, but some are just pop culture. Like, are you paying attention to what is going on in the world? And I tried to create, as all good test makers do, a blend of some that are really, really obvious and easy, and some that are like, well, you had to have been paying attention in school to remember this. Like this is a little tougher, but again, something everyone with a high school education should probably know. So there's a good variety here. Again, there was 55 questions. I'm only going to share a fraction of those just so you get a general feel for it. And if you'd like to see the full quiz and take it yourself, make sure you subscribe and I will give it to you. So let me just give a quick overview of how I came up with these. I even wrote this in a little presentation that I shared with people afterwards, so I'll just read this to you quickly. I create a list of questions that I deem to be relatively common knowledge for educated Americans, those who've completed high school. I also created what I termed linchpin questions, which are those pieces of knowledge that are so vital that if one does not know the answer, a person cannot reasonably participate in a conversation on that topic. So again, this was 2018-ish. Simplistic example might be, what team does Tom Brady play for? If one does not know that answer, the New England Patriots, the person cannot claim to have any interest in football. So this is what I would notice with students where I'd ask them, well, what do you know the most about? What's your favorite thing? And they'd say, football or basketball or whatever. And then I would ask them a very basic question about football or basketball that anyone who actually knows about football or basketball would know. And they go, I don't know. Like, well, then you don't know about it. That's not a thing you know about then, because this is a linchpin question. You have to know this for this conversation about what you say you know about to even go further, okay? And the problem with this, and the reason I wanted to test this, and what young people today and even the tech people today don't think about enough, is by this point, we had gotten to where students started saying, well, I don't need to know stuff because I can just look up whatever I want to know. And yes, we now have all information at our fingertips, and the requirement of memory certainly isn't as strong as it used to be. I understand that. But it's not about memory, okay? The reason we need to know stuff is actually for communication. Here's an example, all right? Aside from the dialogues I would have with students about football or basketball or anything else, imagine you're on a date, okay? And you're out with this nice girl, and you say, oh, what are you into? What are your interests? And she says, yeah, I'm a big movie fan. I love movies. And you say, oh, I do too. I love movies. You're like, okay, so far so good. Sounds like you have something in common. And she goes, yeah, I just the films of 1999 really like changed my life and made me the movie fan I really am, and I just think it was the best year for films that year. And what do you think? What year really shaped your life for movies, and what do you think about the films that came out in 1999? And you go, I don't know any movies that came out in 1999, but I love movies. Well, she would go, well, you don't love movies because anyone who actually loves movies would know at least something about the films of 1999 because it's generally regarded as maybe the greatest year of film ever. All right. So you have to know about that if you're going to have a conversation that has any depth to it about films. If you don't know some of those films, she's not going to want to talk to you. Okay. She's going to think, oh, you're a phony. You said you liked movies, but you don't. You don't know anything about them because anyone who does knows stuff about that topic. So take that idea and take it to any topic in the culture, whether it's on a date, whether it's at a job interview, and the potential boss asks you a question about something going on in the culture, and you're like, I don't know. The boss is going to say, well, then you're not smart enough to work here. Like if I have to wait for you to look up any question I ask you, if the date asks you that question, you're like, well, let me look up what movies came out in 1999. She's going to go, this is taking too long. I'm bored with you. I'm going to go date someone else. Or the boss interviewing you is going to say, if I have to sit here and wait for you to Google or ChatGPT a question the answer to a basic question about our company or about the economic climate or whatever, like, yeah, you can't work here. You're not smart enough. So take a hike. Okay. This isn't a place where we all just sit around Googling everything. We have to know stuff so that we can make our company work. So that's how the reality is. Yes, looking stuff up is great. But the reason we have a cultural memory is so that we can get along with one another. Because if I can tell you don't know stuff, well, I'm probably not going to waste time on it. I'm not going to be friends with you, or I'm not going to hire you, or not going to date you, whatever. Like we kind of have, this is having things in common. It means you know stuff about similar things and you can talk at a relatively, doesn't even have to be super deep, but just, past the superficialities where you can just fake your way through a conversation. I need to know that you know stuff so that we can form a connection with each other as communicating human beings. And so this is the problem with our push toward, oh, well, we don't need to remember stuff because it's all cataloged for us online now. So just look it up. Like, yeah, that doesn't work. It's nice. It does help us when we're doing research and when we have plenty of time to go look up an answer, that's fine. But when you're in the middle of a conversation, when a customer asks you a question, or when your boss asks you a question, or when your date asks you a question, and you're like, hang on, let me Google that, you look stupid and no one wants to talk to you. So that's why we need to know stuff. There has to be some cultural knowledge that then, from a learning standpoint in schools, we can then build on and then use for whatever purposes we want to later. But you have to have this foundational knowledge. And so, yes, this little quiz I've built is a bit of a trivia exercise. You might think, well, those aren't really that important questions. And fair enough, there are some that you could say are kind of like that. But as Americans, or as Westerners at least, these are some of the things that have formed who we are. These are the things that tie us together as a culture. And so there's questions about American history and some stuff on literature. And I've tried to cover a variety of content areas. Again, one, because that's what a culturally literate person would be aware of. They would be aware of a variety of things. But also just from an academic perspective, like I wanted to see what these kids knew about. And what I would do when I was presenting this, I was like, hey, we're just going to take this fun quiz. It's the first day of class. I'm just trying to get to know you. I want to know what you know about. And I would actually say, I make a lot of references in this class to things that are outside of English because I want to get your attention and draw you in and show how these things are all related. And so I need to know, like, what references will you understand? What can I talk about in here so that I can try and help you? And so that made them very positive. So it was about taking the quiz. So, it was meant to be fun. And it was, I presented it in a way that was like, well, I'm just asking you this because I'm going to try to help you with this stuff later. And what they didn't know was, like, I'm asking these questions because I want to know how illiterate all of you people are, because I've seen the decline over the last, 5 to 10 years. And I'd like some proof if that's possible. And so that's why they took the quiz, and that's how it was administered. So as I explained, the following questions come from a variety of subject areas, are fairly distributed among multiple choice and short answer forms, and comprise a blend of academic and pop culture themes. Once again, these are not intended only for experts. These are accessible to all with a basic education. And again, while older adults may have forgotten some of these pieces of information, those who have recently completed 13 consecutive years of daily instruction should be able to be reasonably competent. So I'm just going to share with you some. I'm not again, if you want the whole quiz that you can try yourself or you can give to your kids, subscribe and I'll send it to you. I gave this to over 80 students, which at my university was roughly 2/3 of the freshman class that year and well over 10% of the entire student body. Our school had about 800 students at the time. And again, gave this quiz to 80 to 85 kids. So this is over 10%. So, you might think, well, you're just cherry picking. This is just a sliver, small sample size error and all that stuff. It's like, well, if I was at ASU, which has 80,000 students, and I got a survey from 8,000 of them, 8,000 responses out of 80,000, that's significant. So 10% is not a small number. And I think it's pretty indicative of how the whole school was moving. And I even take it further and go, this is probably how the entire culture is, because our students were, regular students. Would students at MIT and Stanford who are incoming freshmen do better on this quiz? Yeah, probably. I would hope so. But for just a general, average level student, this is who this is for, because that's who I was teaching. So I would assume any kid at any public university, any just regular school where there's regular admission standards, I thought would be fine on this. And I would assume from the results, this is probably widespread, and this would be applicable to all average schools, basic middle of the road universities, because that's what ours was. And 10% of an entire student body, and 2/3 of the whole freshman class, 2/3 of any group, that's a significant number. And so I was trying to show people this is what's happening. These are the freshmen we're getting now. And it's way more difficult to teach them because they don't know anything. So let's dive into a few of the questions. All right, the first history question. In what decade did the United States land the first man on the moon? Over half of our freshmen did not know that the answer is the 1960s. And I also include most interesting answers where you're just like, what? Why would anyone even say that? You're way off. Most interesting answers, 20th decade? I don't know what the 20th decade would be. Their 200th decade? 19th century? And 1975, which is, of course, not a decade. So what you'll see with some of these questions is, okay, not only do you not know when this occurred, like one of the most famous, important things in all of human history happened by an American in a certain year of a certain decade, and you have no idea when that happened. But also, from a reading standpoint, either you're not reading the question closely or you have no idea what a decade is. So if you're in college and you don't know what the word decade means, again, we have another problem. So what a good test maker can do is there's not only a way to craft multiple choice questions, as I'll show here shortly, but also you can elicit other pieces of information other than just the question you're asking. And so, if someone would have said, the 1980s, I'd go, okay, well, at least you know what a decade is. You just don't know the right one. Here, it's clear that students don't even know what a decade means. So you're getting a variety of information from such a simple question. So they don't know that it happened in 1969. Which country was an ally for America during World War II? Multiple choice question, as you can see. Given that multiple choice, 2/3 of our freshmen did not know that the answer was D. And shockingly, roughly 10% picked C. That they thought we were on the side of the Nazis. That's how poorly our students understand American history. Now, this is how you craft a multiple choice question. So all 4 of these countries were involved in World War II. So there's always an option here that students could just guess at. But you would think, well, students would never say Germany. After all, why would we be on the side of the Nazis? They probably shouldn't say Japan because, after all, Japan is the country that actually attacked us. So it's probably down to the other two answers. And they might think, well, we were at odds with the Soviet Union for many, many years, both before and after. So it's probably not them. So I guess it's Italy. I don't know anything about Italy during World War II. So maybe they were on our side. And again, that's not the right answer. So the way you craft a multiple choice question is important. There's a technique to it. And it's intended to isolate those students who actually know what they're talking about. It becomes harder to guess the right answer. You actually have to know it. And that's what a good test kind of teases that out. And on this one, I was shocked to learn that about 10% thought we were on the side of the Nazis during World War II. Another history question. Who was the leader of England during the American Revolution? 82% of our students did not know the answer was King George III. And I would have just said King George was fine. Just say King George. The most interesting answers. Napoleon. Not English. Paul Revere. He's on our side. Not the leader of England. Charles Dickens, not alive during this time. And some students even wrote George Washington was the leader of England. So were they just reading the question too quickly and saw the word leader and then saw American Revolution and thought, oh, it has to be George Washington, and they didn't see leader of England? So as you'll see throughout, it's not just the history question. Like, this is a reading problem and a comprehension problem. You're not even paying attention to what you're doing. And this is what we have in the college classroom today, is they don't know stuff. And then when you try to give them stuff to know, they don't even know how to read it. And so they can't answer a basic question. So now, again, in the real world, if you were to have a conversation with someone about American history and you said, oh, I think George Washington was the leader of England, everyone go, you're an idiot. Get out of here. You can't be part of this conversation. You don't know anything. Because that's the most simple answer you could possibly know about the American Revolution. So, lots of problems here. It's not just the knowledge part. It's also the reading and comprehension part. Another history question. Who was the third president of the United States? Nearly 3/4 of our students did not know it was Thomas Jefferson. Most interesting answers. Sam Adams, never a president. And Abraham Lincoln, nowhere near the third president of the United States. So Thomas Jefferson, kind of an important guy in our history. You might want to know that he was the third president. There's going to be an even worse history question coming up shortly. Who wrote the Gettysburg Address? Speaking of Lincoln, from the last one that someone thought Lincoln was the third president, 46% of our freshmen did not know that Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address, given a multiple choice. So almost half. So basically kids are flipping a coin and going, I don't know, I'll just guess. And 46% don't know that Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address, one of the most important pieces of writing in all of American history. Civil War was fought during what years? Given a multiple choice, 41% of our freshmen didn't know that the answer was B. Weirdly enough, 17% answered D. So these are all dates that should ring a bell to students, especially 1941 to 1945. So again, here's a question that gives you actually two answers out of it. Because not only do you, if you answer D, not only do you not know when the Civil War was fought, you don't know when World War II was fought. So I'm actually getting two pieces of information out of you with just one question, or at least with your bad answer to that question. Shocking that students don't know when that occurred. What about the Great Depression? Here's multiple choice. Mainly took place during what decade? Given a multiple choice, 36% of our freshmen did not know that the answer was B. So again, over a third. And these are given options. If I would have just said, tell me the decade, I am sure the answer would have been even worse than that. It would have probably been like the landing on the moon question, where it'd be all over the place. But I tried to help them out by giving them multiple choice. And even with that, over a third couldn't guess it. Great Depression. Another history question. This one you need to know a little bit of language. The date that will live in infamy is a reference to what important historical event? 83% of our freshmen did not know that this is a reference to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Most interesting answer I saw? Independence Day. So again, not only do you not know the history, you clearly don't know what the word infamy means. So I'm also getting a little vocabulary quiz answer out of this as well. And 83%, again, one of the most important events in our history. A quote that came out of it, spoken by the President of the United States on that fateful day, or about that fateful day. And 83% of our students don't know anything about it. So how do we have a culture of of shared knowledge, but also a bond of a shared history, even if we weren't alive to experience it, that we know where we came from, what we went through, who the leaders were that kind of helped guide us through, if you want to say. Like, how can we ever form bonds and communities with people based on a shared history when nobody knows the shared history? It's tough. Then we wonder why our culture is very fractured. Yeah, because no one knows anything. That's why. Couple more history questions, because again, this is about America and who we are as people. What job did Dwight Eisenhower have before becoming president of the United States? Given a multiple choice, 43% of our freshmen don't know the answer is D. He's the most famous military commander in our nation's history, maybe outside of George Washington. But I mean, he was a 5-star general and got us through World War II. And 43% of our freshmen didn't know that. Kind of an important guy. In the years follow, so let's maybe say, oh, those are old questions. Kids weren't around. They don't know about the American Revolution. They don't know about the Civil War. They don't know about World War II. Okay, what about the most recent incident of 9/11? In the years following the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. entered into war with which two Middle Eastern countries? 70% of our freshmen did not know that the answers are Iraq and Afghanistan. Here are the most interesting answers. Vietnam. They thought Vietnam was after 9/11, and somehow they think Vietnam is in the Middle East. Same thing with South Korea. South Korea is one of our allies. Why we're not going to war with them, and they're not in the Middle East either. And so I'm sure students are like, well, what's a Middle Eastern country? I guess Israel. We're on the same side usually with Israel, and Jerusalem isn't even a country. So again, you can get a lot of information about how little students know with a very basic question. It's kind of shocking. So this is, not only do they know history, this is still kind of current events. Like people still talk about these things. We still have troops in these places, and you don't know that. And yet these kids vote. Once you're 18, you can vote on these topics, and yet no one knows anything about them. This one's crazy. Another history question. Where did this quote come from? When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds, yada, yada. 89% of our freshmen do not know these are the opening lines of the most important document in American history, the Declaration of Independence. And I would argue the most important, out of religious texts, the most important piece of writing that's ever been written in the history of the world. That's how important this document is. It changed world history forever, unlike anything else. Again, outside of probably the Bible. So how do you not know this? 89% of our freshmen didn't know this. And I was at a school that was very patriotic, conservative, lots of belief in the foundational American ideals, capitalism, republicanism, regarding voting and things like that. This is a conservative school, and you don't know the Declaration of Independence, the most important language that's ever been crafted. Shocking. 89% didn't know. What about more recently? Okay, Donald Trump had just been elected by this time. So what two presidents preceded Barack Obama? 72% of the freshmen did not know that it was Bush and Clinton. Most interesting answers, Obama and Trump. Again, they don't know what preceded means, I guess. Some people thought Palin and Romney were president. No, not even close. Some people said Joe Biden. Again, he hadn't become president yet. And then some people even said JFK. Yeah, he preceded Barack Obama, but not immediately preceded him. So this is where kids are like, I don't know any presidents. I guess I'll just say JFK. All right, what about civics? What is the term length for a Supreme Court justice? Again, you're a voter. You have to know this. 61% of our freshmen didn't know the answer is for life or if they resign. 61% don't know. Most interesting answer, several students qualified their guess at term length based on, quote, good behavior. Like it's a prison sentence or something. Well, if you do a good job, you can stay or whatever. Again, the how Supreme Court influences presidential elections is very important, and yet kids don't even know how long Supreme Court justices serve. It's wild. In what year did women receive the right to vote? Okay, so this is one that might be, well, that's pretty specific. Now, I gave a multiple choice, so you could guess at it based on what you think the other years are, what events happened in those years. And all these other years are very important years in American history. So again, if you don't know that it's 1920, You also don't know probably what was going on in these other years, which are also very important. And yeah, 63% of our freshmen on a multiple choice couldn't pick out that the answer was 1920. Many students think, well, women have always had the right to vote. And then some students think women just got the right to vote yesterday. It's like, no, it's been a while, but it's, it was in the 1900s. So it's still fairly recent. Another civics question, what was the 13th Amendment to the Constitution? So here's another one that you might think, well, that's who remembers all the amendments? I don't remember all of them either. But after the first and the second ones, you kind of should know the 13th should ring a bell, okay? Because it's the most important one after the first two. And 87% of our freshmen didn't know that had to do with abolishing slavery. Most interesting answers, freedom of press. No, that's the first one, not the 13th one. Right to bear arms. That's the second one, not the 13th one. And don't cheat on your wife. That's just a good rule in general. Not in the Constitution, but yes, that's a good rule to live by, I would say. What about math and measurements? Which is the greater length, a mile or a kilometer? Half of our freshmen did not know that a mile is longer. So again, coin flip, they don't know. You could just guess. A monkey could just flip a coin and go and get the answer right as much as a college freshman these days. The most interesting answer, they're the same length. A mile and a kilometer are the same length. This one, no one got this right almost. You're out to dinner and the bill comes to $21.50. You decide to leave a 20% tip. How much will the total bill be? 84% of our freshmen do not know that the answer is $25.80. Most interesting answers, $42, because apparently you double the bill. That's a hefty tip. Another student said $6 because you should always leave a larger tip than you want to. So again, here's a question that elicits a variety of information. One, students can't do the basic mathematical operations to find a percent and then add it to the total bill or to the bill to make it a total. Many students just did the quick calculation of the tip, but they didn't follow the second part of the question. How much will the total bill be? So again, this is a reading question too, as much as a math question. And 84% of the students couldn't do it. So not only can they not do basic math, they also can't read a basic question. This is crazy. What's the formula for finding the area of a rectangle? The simplest mathematical formula that exists. And half of our freshmen did not know. All they need to write down is length times width. Half of incoming freshmen across the country, or at least at average schools, don't know that length times width is the area of a rectangle. The simplest formula in all of math. They can't do it. Half. It's wild. All right, let's get away from math. What about arts and media? What acclaimed film franchise tells the story of the Corleone family? Almost 90% of our freshmen don't know about The Godfather. Probably the greatest film ever made in America. And 90% of people have no knowledge of it. Even a basic knowledge like, well, I've never seen The Godfather, but when you hear the name Corleone, you kind of know, oh, that's from The Godfather. Nope, they had no idea. Almost 90% don't know anything about the best film in American history. Who were John, Paul, George, and Ringo? 71% of our freshmen didn't know that these are the first names of the Beatles. Most interesting answers, the Three Musketeers. There's 4 names there, so I don't know why they said Three Musketeers. Men from the Bible. Little more insight. In addition to being a conservative school that, is very like America, American pride, American knowledge, American culture first kind of stuff. We're also a Christian college. So, studying the Bible is part of our curriculum. And getting kids into our school who are already Christians was kind of our big deal. And so when students say, oh, is Ringo in the Bible? Yeah, we let that kid into our school who said he was a Christian, who said he knew the Bible, and yet obviously didn't. So this is what I was noticing at my university. Like, wait a second, we say that we stress these things in our admissions. We want great students. We want strong Christians. We want people who care about America and our foundational culture. And yet these are the types of answers we get, that some people think George and Ringo are in the Bible at our Christian university. So there you go. Who was Luciano Pavarotti? 95% of our freshmen do not know that he was a singer. Most interesting answers, he was a mobster or the inventor of pasta. So think of that what you will. That if you hear an Italian name and you don't know anything about him, your immediate thoughts are, oh, he must have been a mobster or he invented pasta. Kind of a funny answer. But again, even if you don't like opera music, I'm not a fan of opera either. Yet, if you'd have asked me this at 17 years old or 18, I would have known. So he was really famous. You should know famous people. Okay, what about literature? So this is my area. So John Milton wrote which famous literary work? Multiple choice. 77% from a multiple choice did not know the answer is D, Paradise Lost. This is something that should have been at least referenced in high school, even if you didn't read the whole thing. When I was in school, I think we read a passage from it. But again, this was at a university that's a conservative Christian university. John Milton is one of the most important Christian authors of all time, and Paradise Lost is one of the most important pieces of religious themed texts ever produced. And yet our Christian college students, 77% of them, couldn't pick it out of a multiple choice. That's alarming. Walt Whitman was a poet during which era? Again, multiple choice. He's the most important poet in American history. And 60% of our students couldn't guess that he worked during the 1800s. So again, this is one of those questions that you obviously, there's several things happening here. You may not know who Walt Whitman was at all. Even if you did, you might not know his place in American literary history. And then you also might not know his place specifically on the timeline of American history. Because him writing in the 1800s really changed things for America. And if you don't know that, you don't know much about American literary history and cultural history. Similar time period, what Mark Twain novel is about a boy who runs away from home and befriends a slave? 81% of our freshmen did not know that the book is Huckleberry Finn. Many people think Huckleberry Finn is the most important American novel ever written. Okay? That's how important that book is for many people. It's that famous and that influential for our American culture. And 81% had no idea. I gave you the author and the plot, and you didn't know it. Most interesting answer and common answer. Student said The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which is from 2006, and it's about the Holocaust, not a 19th century novel about slavery. So, they're not even close. And I think what happens with the question like this is students just go, well, I don't know anything about literature, but I know in whatever year, I've never read Boy in the Striped Pajamas, so I don't know what year kids read that in school. But they're like, well, I did kind of like that one book once, so I'll just write that one down. And it's not even close. It's amazing. You don't know who Mark Twain is. You don't know a piece of literature about slavery. And you're just naming the one thing you think you know about. It's wild. So I'm like, okay, maybe that stuff's too old. Let me give them something more recent. J.K. Rowling is the author behind what world-renowned fictional character over a third of our freshmen didn't know the answer is Harry Potter? So again, this is more in their childhood timeline. If you're a kid growing up in the early 2000s, you would know this. And yet, even if you didn't read those books, you would know. I never read them either, but I know I know the answer. So even things that are more recent, kind of like the 9/11 question from history, here's recent literary history, just general pop culture. You should know who J.K. Rowling is. She's one of the wealthiest, most famous people who's ever lived. You don't know anything about her. Who is Oscar Wilde? 64% of our freshmen don't know that he was an author in the 1800s. 64%. Just the name. Again, you don't have to have read Picture of Dorian Gray or Importance of Being Earnest or his work on theory or anything like that. You don't have to know anything about that. Just do you recognize the name and that he was a writer? Nope. 64% don't know it. What about language? Here's a saying, okay? Even if you're not traveling in Rome, you should abide by the phrase, when in Rome. So what does this mean? 87% of our freshmen do not know that this means to do as the Romans do, which is behave in the manners of the local customs. The most interesting answer, what happens in Rome stays in Rome. So this is one thing, if you're watching the movie Anchorman, where there's a whole scene or a joke about this line, now you don't get to participate in the joke because you don't know anything about language and about the sayings that people have in the culture. So you really miss out. If you don't know stuff and you have to look stuff up all the time, you miss out. So a funny joke in a funny movie is completely lost on you because you don't know this saying. But also, it's just a good rule to live by. When you're in a local culture, you might want to try to blend in. That's a good idea. What is a pseudonym? Well, if they would have studied Mark Twain, they would already know this, but 86% of our freshmen didn't know that this obviously means a fictitious name or an alias. So again, it's kind of vocabulary. They don't know the vocabulary. They didn't know what the word infamy means. They don't know what pseudonym means. These are kind of important words. What about geography? Like, do you just know where stuff is here in America? I have a whole list. Here are just some of the ones that really stood out to me. 55% of our freshmen didn't know that the Alamo is in Texas. 83 didn't know that the Sears Tower is in Illinois. It used to be the tallest building in the world. 81% of our freshmen don't know that the Gateway Arch is located in Missouri. Kind of a famous landmark. And 59% of our freshmen didn't even know that the city of Cincinnati is located in Ohio. Again, Cincinnati is not Los Angeles. It's not New York. But it's kind of, it's a city you've heard of. You don't know what state it's in? It's shocking. What about economics? So here I had them do a little bit of writing. Write a general overview of how supply and demand are related in determining the pricing mechanism in economics. All right. 76% of our freshmen do not know how the prices are influenced by supply and demand. All I had to say is, in a couple sentences, just say, when supply is high and demand is low, prices are low. High supply, low demand, no one wants it. That means the price is going to come down and be cheap. Opposite happens. High demand, low supply, prices go up because everyone wants it, and so they're willing to pay more for it. That's how it goes. That's all you had to say. And yet 76% didn't know how that works. Someone said, we are only supplied when we pay a certain amount of taxes. So this is like a socialist answer. So we're at a school that promotes capitalism and like freedom and liberty and entrepreneurship and all this stuff. And yet someone said, well, we only get stuff when we pay taxes. And yet that student came to our school and was in my class. Amazing. What about science? Basic one from 3rd grade. Earth is the 3rd closest planet to the sun. What's the 2nd closest? 66% of our freshmen don't know the answer is Venus. Most interesting answers, Neptune. That's way far away from, not even close to being the 2nd. And some people thought the moon is a planet. These are our college freshmen. They think the moon is a planet. Yeah. Here's another science question. Fill in the blank. A quick summary of Isaac Newton's second law of motion is that mass times blank equals force. 51% of our freshmen couldn't fill in the blank and say acceleration or speed. Most interesting answers, sound, depth, or space. Mass times sound equals force, I guess. Too funny. But this is also one of those things like any sort of critical thinking for like 90 seconds when the kid's sitting at his desk going, well, I don't know anything about Newton and whatever the second law of motion is. But if I'm measuring force, how forceful something is, and one of the components is mass. So again, maybe they don't know what mass is, but if mass means size of something, well, it must be how big something is times some other factor equals how much force it has. Well, I can tell that if no matter how big it is, if it's only going very slowly, it probably doesn't have a lot of force. But if it's going really fast, boy, that's a lot more force. So maybe it's speed. Nope, couldn't figure that out on your own. Half of students couldn't do it. A general overview of the scientific method, okay? 66% of our freshmen, over 2/3, had no idea of even a few basic steps. And I would have accepted any coherent combination of questioning, hypothesizing, testing, collecting data, and drawing conclusions. I would have taken any of those. And yet, not even close. 66% couldn't do it. So 2/3 of our students don't know how to do science, how you study something, how you gather information and come to a conclusion about something. Like, it's the foundation of how you build knowledge, and yet they don't know. 2/3 of students don't know that. Most interesting answers. I sort of forgot the scientific method, so I say of find the way you want to start, then observe when then testing out the hypothesis to the equation that you made. No idea what that says. This is an adult student. This is a college freshman, at least 18 years of age, who cannot write a coherent sentence. These are the students at our universities today, and no one's doing anything about it except let's let even more of them in. This is the problem. Another student said the general overview of the steps in the scientific method are volume, gas, and liquid. Those aren't steps. I don't know what that means. All right. So the conclusions to be drawn, of course, are we let in to our universities kids who have very little foundational knowledge of anything, of history, of science, of math, of literature, of pop culture. They don't know anything. And yet they're coming to our schools and we're supposed to teach them. Well, the way you teach something is you have to have initial knowledge first. You have to know something. And so then we can teach stuff on top of that. And then when you handle that, when you get smarter about that thing, we can teach stuff on top of that. And you keep building. And by the time you're at college, we should be way up here because you have 13 years of all these levels of learning. And we can't do the most basic, we can't come up with the most basic answers about the simplest things in our culture that who have made, us Westerners who we are. This is why teaching at the college level is so difficult. We have to start at elementary school again. They've learned nothing in their 13 years of K through 12 education. Now, is this everybody? No, of course not. Was this even everybody at my school? No, of course not. But when we have to speak about averages because there's millions of college kids across the country. So even if it's just a fraction of that, it's a real problem. If there's hundreds of thousands of students across the country who don't know the most basic things about anything related to cultural knowledge, how in the world do we make them into experts in anything? You're not even on first base yet. You don't know the basic steps of the scientific method. How in the world are you going to get in a lab and do serious research about medicine and about genetics and, trying to cure cancer and stuff? You don't know anything about the scientific method after 13 years of schooling. How are you going to be an engineer when you don't know anything about math? How are you going to be a teacher of English when you don't know anything about, these famous authors and their famous books? How are you going to be able to participate in the voting process in our, as a citizen? You don't know anything about what our country is and where it came from and what have been the most important developments and the most important people who have influenced this culture. If you don't know any of that, how can you participate in these important institutions like academia, like voting and government practice, like business? You don't know anything. And your answer is, well, I can always look it up. Yeah, you can, and no one's ever going to want to talk to you because you're so boring. Because no one's going to sit around and wait for you when they ask you a question. Hang on, give me a few minutes to Google this. Yeah, they're like, forget it. I'm out. I'm on to someone smarter than you. That's what's happening. And so that's what's happening, as I said 1,000 times, out in the business world or any other industry where they're looking at recent graduates and they're going, yeah, you guys aren't qualified. You don't know enough stuff to be hired at this company. What's going on here? This is what's going on. They weren't taught things for 13 years. Or if they were, it was never made serious enough for them to actually retain it. And, we let people slide. We go, oh, it's okay that you don't know these things. Oh, we'll give you a third chance on this test. We'll give you a makeup quiz. Oh, I'll excuse your absence. It's okay that you skipped school today. Oh, that presentation was fine. I'll give you a B, even though shouldn't have passed at all. Like when we let things slide for 13 years, then they show up on my doorstep as a freshman in college. And I go, you don't know anything. I don't even know how to talk to you because every reference I make to the broader culture, you sit there and stare at me with glass eyes. So how am I supposed to teach you? I have to start from zero with many of you. Again, not all of them, but many of them. And this got to be where I noticed at my school, it went from when I first started there, it was like, okay, 80% of these kids are pretty good. They're doing fine. And 20% are rough. Like they don't know a lot. I don't think they should probably be in college. Somehow they got in, but it's that percentage. So out of a class of 20, I'd have 16 kids. I was like, great. And I'd have to spend extra time with those 4 kids, which, happens in any type of educational environment. Well, the longer I taught, that number actually started flipping. It wasn't just, oh, it's working its way towards like half and half. No, it's the opposite. 20% of kids are doing just fine. Doesn't mean they're super smart, but they're definitely capable and they deserve to be at college and they're gonna learn more and they're gonna be successful and all that stuff. But I'm not joking, there are 80% of kids at universities today who don't know these things. Okay, and that's what happened in my classrooms. I'd have the same 20 kids 10 years later, and only 4 of them would be good students, and the other 16 would be causing problems behaviorally, or they just would be so low skilled that it would ruin the whole class. And so now the 4 good kids are furious because 16 of the other kids are dragging them down. Whereas when it was the other way around, I had 16 good kids and 4 struggling kids. those kids they can pull the bottom up. When you're way outnumbered like that, and there's only 4 smart kids and 16, you know, kids who are unqualified, those kids cannot pull these kids up. These kids drag the rest down. It doesn't make them dumber. It makes everything slower though. And so now these kids can't progress because we're waiting on these kids so much. So that's what's happening. In all my years of teaching, that's what I saw. And I'm being a little generous by saying 80% of my kids were pretty good when I started. It might have not been that high, but it was up there. And I can only imagine what it was like in decades prior. I mean, I think back to my university days in the late 90s, and I think, again, you would look around a classroom and you're like, okay, that kid, that guy, he's kind of a dum-dum. But it'd be like one guy, maybe 2 in your class of 20 or 30 students. Everyone else, you look around and go, okay, yeah, that girl's pretty bright. Yeah, that kid's pretty smart. He's in my dorm. I know him. He's pretty bright. I'm pretty smart. So like you look around, you could tell, okay, we're all doing pretty well here. You could pinpoint the couple who were not qualified. Now, the majority of the class is like that. I would say it's 80%. It's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the students are going to cause huge problems on your campus. Again, either just academically because they're so far behind, you have to devote so many resources to catching them up, which you can't because they had 13 years. You're not going to catch them up in 1 year, and by the time they're sophomores, they're suddenly super excellent students. It's just not going to happen. So you're spending all this money on tutors and these student services departments. Why? Because you brought in horrible students. That's why. And the 20% of your kids who deserve to be at school and who are doing just fine, they're mad at everyone else because they're like, you're ruining my education because I have to go so slow to wait for you. And the teacher has to go over something 10 times because of you. So then you think, well, what about the smartest of those kids, the kids who are truly the smartest kids at our universities today? I mean, they want nothing to do with those kinds of classes and those kinds of kids. And so either they drop out and like, I'd be better off just going and starting my own business and making $1 million, engineering something, or they only go to the elite institutions and they never intermingle with average students at average universities because they're like, yeah, I can't be around you. You're too dumb. I'm not going to be a part of this. I know I'm smart, so I'm going to go here where the smart people are. And then everyone else sifts to the bottom down here, and this is where we are. So again, I don't know what the numbers are, but that's my best guess. It's about 80-20. 20% of kids are doing fine, 80% struggle. And I did this this test. I couldn't repeat it because word got around that I was giving this quiz, and I could tell people were talking about it. And then the next year, the former students were like, oh, he's going to give you this quiz on whatever. And so like I couldn't surprise them anymore. So I only did it the once. But I will be honest, in the years that followed this, our enrollment got even worse as far as the quality. We lowered our standards more. So if I would have done this in future years, it would have been even worse than this. So I can only imagine what it is now, 7 years later. So when people wonder about college and wonder what it's really like, and we wonder how young people are going to manage, getting through more education and preparing for the working world, we have to face the facts that this is what's going on. There are students at many universities across the country who can't answer the most basic things about who we are, where we came from, what our country is built on, and what are the most important things for being a, quote, educated citizen of this country. They can't do it. They don't know it. And we keep saying, well, let's use more technology and we'll just look everything up. That's not how it works. Yes, it works that way for some things, but not for our daily interactions. You have to know stuff. You just do. And we're spitting out, kids with college diplomas, and we're calling them educated, and they're not. They don't know these things. And so our culture keeps getting worse. Businesses keep getting mad because the young people coming up don't know anything. And what's our answer? Keep shoving more kids into this system. Like that's the opposite of what you should be doing. We should be cranking up the intensity of our K through 12 education for sure, and then weeding out all of these kids at college and saying you can't be here or you don't need to be here. Go do something else that you actually will like, because knowledge isn't your thing. So go do something different. College isn't the place for you. But we don't do that. We just keep letting more and more in, lower and lower standards, and so these are the results. We also can see from things like this that the testing we do at the K through 12 level is meaningless. Okay, SAT scores are still generally the best thing we can do, but GPAs, nonsense. Because if you would know these, you'd have higher GPAs. But if you have high GPAs, you would know this, but they don't. So we have kids graduating from high school with really high GPAs, and then the colleges go, oh, they're really smart. Let's let them into our school. And then they get there and like, yeah, but they don't know anything. The GPA was phony because their K through 12 teachers inflated their grades and gave them, let them pass and let them get good grades when they weren't actually performing at that level. It's a problem on the production side, the K through 12 side. We are not holding kids accountable. We are not holding parents accountable. And we as teachers are not holding ourselves accountable, where we hold firm and say, no, you are not passing this class, or you are getting an F on this test or this paper because you are not at a competent level. But we don't do that. So we just keep passing them along. We inflate their grades. So now a kid graduates from high school with a 3.3 GPA, and they don't know what length times width means. They don't know when we even landed on the moon. They don't know the basics of American culture. They don't know the basics of science. They don't know anything. And yet somehow they got a 3.3 GPA in high school, and now the colleges go, oh, they're good. They're a good student. Let them into our school. And then they end up in my class, and I can't even talk to them because they don't know anything. And this happens all across the country. So this is my reply to that Twitter and Substack account who is asking for professors to give their anecdotes and their data about how underprepared students are for college. So this is just one test I came up with. I'm sure other professors out there have their own stories, but at least mine is not just a story. I actually did an experiment, and I gave a test, and I collected data, and so I have some element of proof that's not just something I was thinking was going on. This was real, and this is one of the reasons I became very disillusioned with the university world. So take it for what it's worth. But if you'd like the full quiz and challenge yourself or challenge your students with it, just subscribe here, and I'll be happy to share it with you. Have a good one.